We can take America for God by giving the ministry to laymen who are using their gifts to grow their groups to double their classes every 2 years or less. And if I can kind of weigh in on the question that I left y'all with, where is your heart toward people who are far from God? I do think there is something to be said for it being distasteful to us to be around some of the habits of unchurched and ungodly people. And in a way, I think that's normal, in some sense, kind of a good thing. And I do think, Steve Camp had an old song that had a line in it that said, some people want to live within the sound of chapel bells. I want to run a mission within a yard from the gate of hell. And some people have that kind of mentality, that they want to get out there on the front line. You've probably known people, as I have, that in an honest-to-goodness effort to reach lost people would go to bars and kind of the front line, so to speak, a yard from the gate of hell kind of stuff. And I think God has wired up some people to do that kind of thing. And maybe some others of us, not so much. We're more in the rear echelon a little more. But I think in our heart, all of us need to kind of think about moving in the direction of developing a heart like the heart of God. I just want to say to you again, you cannot get close to God. You cannot have spiritual maturity without a heart that beats for people who are far from God. And if we think we are, we're not getting better Christians. We're just getting to be better, more churchy, and not really developing a real heart like the heart of God. There is an inclination that when we come to faith in Christ that all of us have, and the truth is, in a way, it has to do with any good news that comes our way. Whether it is the opening of a new Walmart in town or the birth of a new grandbaby, when good news comes our way, we have an inclination that says, I have got to tell somebody about this. I have just got to tell someone. I remember driving down the road in Alabama one time, and I saw this billboard on the side of the road that just spelled it out right there in bold letters, "Go to church." And I thought, well, here's an old boy who's trying. I mean, I'm not sure how effective that is. I'm not sure how many people are going to show up in church, but, give a guy an A for effort. Give him a gold star here because he's trying. He's got this billboard up here that says, "Go to church." I got a little closer, drove down the freeway, got a little closer to the sign, and I noticed the fine print on the sign said, "Or the devil might get you." And I've been thinking through the theology of that one. I don't know what you think about the theology, but I'm not completely comfortable with all the theology of that one. I think there's more to our theology than that. But once again, I thought, you know what? Here is a guy who is trying. He's trying to deal with this inclination. And in a way, it has to do with the good news that comes our way, and we tried to stir up that inclination a little bit in the first half. But it has to do, in a way, it's kind of a natural inclination that any good news comes our way, we just have a feeling of, I have got to tell someone. I remember when my third baby was born, maybe because I thought this would be my last, maybe because it was my first daughter, I had an especially strong inclination to just want to go up to anybody I could find and say, "We had a baby." I wanted to find me a box somewhere and stand up on the box and say, "We had a baby." I remember this was before the days of pay at the pump, and I remember going and get some gas like the day after Destiny was born. And I just wanted to go up to that gas station attendant, that clerk, and shake her and say, "We had a baby." I wanted to, but I didn't actually do it. I walked in and I paid for my gas and I walked out. And the reason for that might be a little obscure to you, meeting me in a context like this. Because you meet me in a context and I'm standing on a stage somewhere, there's a tendency on your part to think that I'm kind of a naturally extroverted, outgoing, confrontational kind of person. A lot of people make that assumption about people who stand up on stages. But if you know people who stand up on stages, you'll discover they're kind of an even cross-section of society. And some of them are those kind of personalities, but some of us, like me, are really kind of non-confrontational people. I had a charge on my bank card the other day on one of my credit cards. And I called my credit card to ask what the deal was with that. And it actually spelled out on the credit card statement the actual phone number of who had been paid in this transaction. And after talking to my credit card people for a while, I said, I guess I could call them and ask why they're charging something, why they're taking money from me. It's like $150 they just taken from my account. And I said, I guess I could call them and ask them why they took this money away from me, because I never heard of them. And she said, yeah, I think you should do that. But I just thought, I just hate doing that kind of thing. I mean, confronting them, saying, "Sir, why did you take this money from me?" And that may seem a little silly to you, but that's kind of a statement of my personality. I just am not very confrontational. I try to push myself in these areas, but oftentimes you put me on an airplane somewhere, and I got to force myself to say hello to the person next to me, much less enter into some grand conversation about their spiritual state. And many of us, the research indicates, in fact, about 90% of us struggle to find a way to communicate. I think we mean well, we intend to, we'd like to, we feel some joy in God. Maybe God is working on our hearts to cultivate in us a heart like the heart of God that just bleeds for, prays for, cares for people who are far from God. But even if we get the heart issue right, I think for many of us, we still struggle a little bit. And it really is not so much a spiritual issue of not wanting to tell about Jesus. It's kind of a personality issue in a way that we don't want to tell people about anything. I mean, we're just not very extroverted. We're just a little bit shy, many of us. Well, I have found a way, and it's working in churches. I say I do about 100 of these a year, and getting real positive feedback. That's in two different churches, year before last, came back last year, and in two different cases, those churches were up by 150 in 1 year. I was in another church, actually an association in Northwest Oklahoma, year before last, came back last year, and the entire church doubled in 1 year. Now, the title of the book is You Can Double Your Class in 2 years or Less. I've got another book called You Can Double Your Church in 5 years or less, based on the dream that maybe I don't really actually have enough faith to believe that we could get every class doubling every 2 years or less, but I think maybe we could get enough of them on pace to do that maybe we could double the entire church, not in 2 years, but in 5 years. But this church said, we can do this. And they doubled their entire church in 1 year. Now, to be fair, I think this was like a church of 20 that grew to be a church of 40. So I don't want to overstate the case here, you know. This is not some grand mega church somewhere. But the truth is, a lot of small churches struggle because they say, we can't grow because we don't have the resources of you big churches. We don't have the projectors, and we don't have the musicians, and we don't have the, you know, all the stuff that you guys have, the staff, the money, the resources, etc. And poor us, we'd like to do something for God, but we just don't have the stuff to get it done. But this group said, we can get this done. And in fact, one of the most curious things that I discovered as I travel, I've heard, for example, I think 3 different stories in like the last 10 days. Whereas, and there have been variations on a theme, obviously, but people have come up to me like in the last 10 days, 3 different ones, and said something like this to me. What you're talking about is the stuff that I've seen actually working in the trenches in over a lifetime of working in Sunday school. Nobody really talked about it. We talked about this campaign and that emphasis and this high attendance day and visitation and this revival. And we talked about a lot of stuff that got a lot of upfront attendance, and nobody ever got around to talking about the stuff that you're talking about. But truthfully, as I think about a life of attending Sunday school and ministering in Sunday school, this is the stuff that was really working. And I've had like 3 people, let's say, in the last 10 days that say, you know what, we started a class of 8 college students. Next thing you know, we had 40. We went and fed them every night. Somebody just yesterday, or day before yesterday, I guess it was, said they've got a group of college students. In this case, it was college students that they feed. And the curious thing is they can't get them to come to Sunday school, so they feed them after church. And then they said, well, we can't get them to come to Sunday school, so we'll do Sunday school when they want to come. They want to come to 11 o'clock worship service and come eat, we'll do Sunday school then. And if they won't come to us, we'll come to them. And they grow a huge group of people because they're doing that. And I say I've had 2 or 3 stories just in the last week along those lines. I met with one Sunday school teacher in Florida who had moved to Florida with a viewpoint of retiring. He was going to kick back not only from his day job, but also from the life. He was tired of serving the Lord, in a sense, and had worked in several churches and church planting and whatnot, and just tired. And said he was going to come to Florida and just warm a pew for the rest of his life. Well, after a year or 2, God and a minister of education got a hold of him and persuaded him otherwise, and he took a group of about 30, and next thing you know, they had 130 people attending. And he had a very creative way, by the way, of doubling his class, of reproducing his class. He moved his class to the 7:30 a.m. time slot. How many of you are feeling 7:30 a.m. Sunday school? You like that idea? Well, as it turns out, about half the people he was teaching did not like the idea, but that was okay with him because he wanted to divide his class in 2. This is a great way to do it. You want to divide a class in 2, just start meeting at 7:30. Guarantee you half the people won't come. I wouldn't come. I don't care if you were Billy Graham or, Chuck Swindoll. I wouldn't come at 7:30. But at any rate, this guy knew that. He knew if I go at 7:30, maybe I can get some of them to come, but he's done this 2 or 3 times, in fact. And I've heard more stories than I can imagine of people who have gotten this stuff done. In fact, last weekend, I was down in San Antonio, and somebody sent me an email. I spoke on, was it Friday and Saturday, and challenged them to give Friday nights to Jesus and do some things we're going to talk about tonight and tomorrow. And I got an email about Monday of this week that somebody said, we decided to put it to work. I went to my Sunday school class, and I said, from now on, starting today, we're going to go to CC's every day, Sunday after lunch, or after church on Sunday. And I want you to go out and do to the auditorium. In the book, I had this concept I call zone offense, where I challenge the group to just spread out across your auditorium, and each one of you get a little section. And if you find somebody in that section that is not going to your Sunday school and might be a prospect for your class, they're your person to go after. And they did a similar kind of thing. They said if you find anybody, this was a rather small church, I think they said they had 2 visitors that day. They invited both to come to CC's, and one of them did. And they over lunch, they said, do all these people go to your Sunday school? They told me there were 22 people at CC's that day. And they said, yeah, as a matter of fact, they do. They said, well, we want to come to a class like this. And I've heard positive stories all across North America and done 2 different tours of Australia, and it's working in many, many places. I did this seminar for a long time based on my own experience, but it's been my happy privilege to do it in lots and lots of churches. I want to be clear that it doesn't work everywhere, and I want to be honest enough to share with you a few stories along the way about places where it's not working. For example, I'll tell you one right now. I had one guy come up to me one time and say, I love your book. You can double your class in 2 years or less. I especially love this concept of giving Friday night to Jesus. And we'll unpack what that means after a while, but he said, I especially love that concept. And I said, oh, really? How's it going? Oh, I don't do it. I just think it's a great idea. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't working in his case. And surprise, surprise. And so it's not working everywhere. I'm going to tell you a few of those stories along the way. But in many, many cases, it is working, and I believe it can work in your case as well. I want to argue, though, that you already know how to double. And I want to prove it by asking you this question. How many of you think that you could figure out how to have twice as many in your Sunday school class as you had last Sunday if we offered you and everybody in your class $1 million to get it done? Can I see your hands? Could you get it done if we offered you $1 million? You could get it done, right? All right, I want to ask you once again to turn to the person next to you. I'm kind of a collector of good ideas, and I want you to talk about this for about 2 minutes. How would you double your class if we offered you and everybody in your class $1 million to get it done? Now, before you get into that, I know how clever some of you people are, because I've done this a few times. You cannot pay people to come to Sunday school, okay? So just strike that off your list. You can't give them big screen TVs or hold a raffle. You can't hire me to come. Some people have suggested that from time to time. You can't quit your day job and live off your credit cards and assume you can pay them off when you get your $1 million. You can't do anything weird, all right? Just kind of work with me here, all right? But within the constraints of kind of normal things, how would you double your class if we offered you $1 million to get it done? Turn to the person next to you and talk about that for a minute. All right, let me give you my 5-step strategy for doubling a class every 2 years or less. I've heard some adaptations on this. You notice that this spells out the word tiger, T-I-G-E-R. I've actually had one adaptation that spells out the word Texas. Y'all would probably like that one, T-E-X-A-S. And I was in South Carolina yesterday. There was a pastor there who had one that spelled out the word grits, G-R-I-T-S. Anyway, there's a number of ways you could go at this, but my 5-step strategy spells out the word tiger, and it goes like this. The first thing we want to do is teach a halfway decent lesson each and every week. Nothing less will do. And it is one of our big 5, so let me get you to say this with me just to cement this in your mind. Say it good and loud with me, will you? Teach a halfway decent lesson each and every week. Nothing less will do. Now, I've had people disagree with me. This plan is not without its controversy, and I had people disagree with me at nearly every point along the way, and I have had people disagree with me at this point. In fact, just yesterday, one of my hosts, I've been to this place in South Carolina a couple of times before, and one of them said, man, the first time you came, one of my guys in my church, he was so mad when you got to this point, he wanted to just stand up and scream. I was down in Austin, Texas, and San Antonio, Texas one time, and doing this seminar, and I got to this point, and a lady just stood up, couldn't help herself, just stood up at the back of the hall, and she said, hang on here. I disagree with you, Josh. We don't need halfway decent teaching. We need incredible teaching. We need excellent teaching. We need the best teaching we can get. To which I want to respond by saying, I disagree. I don't think you have to be Chuck Swindoll to get this stuff done. I don't think you have to be Beth Moore to double a Sunday school class. I don't think you have to be Zeke Zieler to get this stuff done. Now, if you are Chuck Swindoll, life starts to get easy for you. You know, if you're Beth Moore, it's fairly easy to double a Sunday school class. I don't know if you know the story of Chuck Swindoll, but he was a pastor out in California, moved to Dallas to become the president of Dallas Theological Seminary. After a while, he got an itch to get back to preaching and get back to pastoring. And so he decided, got the word out. A little small group came up, showed up on a Wednesday night. 200 people showed up. You know, if you're Chuck Swindoll, you can do that kind of thing. The next Sunday, they doubled in 1 week. They went from 200 to 400 in 1 week. And if you're Chuck Swindoll, you can do that kind of thing. Next week, doubled again, 800 the very next week. And you can do that if you're Chuck Swindoll, but the truth is God did not give us very many Chuck Swindolls. Now, maybe I'm missing how some people imply or what they hear when I say this. I'm not saying to drop the level down to halfway decent. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying it's got to be at least halfway decent. And I want to lend confidence to you. If you look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm just not a Beth Moore kind of gal. I'm not a Chuck Swindoll kind of guy, and I can't give this polished, eloquent presentation. I'm just kind of a normal old person. I want to lend confidence to you and say to you, God can use you to turn the world upside down. It's what amazed the world about the early church, that the Bible says that God has taken the mystery of the gospel and poured it into common, ordinary, earthen vessels. Jars of clay, another translation has it. Howard Hendricks paraphrased it by saying, God has taken the mystery of the gospel and poured it into common, ordinary peanut butter jars. It's what amazed the world about the explosive church, the early church, that they saw this explosive, expanding growth, rapid growth of the early church. And they were expecting to see some really sharp cookies at the top of that leadership pyramid. And they saw Peter and James and John. And these guys were just normal old Joes. They're just normal old kind of people who had dirt underneath their fingernails and so on. And they said, how could this happen? And it's God's design, it's God's pleasure to use ordinary people to get the world upside down, turn the world upside down. But I want to tell you, as somebody in Oklahoma said it to me one time, good visitation will not overcome bad teaching. And you got to have at least halfway, it doesn't have to be incredible, but it's got to be at least halfway decent teaching each and every week. Nothing less will do. And to illustrate this point, there's really kind of two sides of the point. If you're picking up on that, it's got to be halfway decent, but it doesn't have to be incredible. And to illustrate kind of both of those, I like to ask this question. Who is the #1 provider of hamburgers worldwide? 1, 2, 3? McDonald's, right? All right, very good. On a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to rate McDonald's best hamburger, all right? Now, let me ask you to set down your pen and paper for just a second. We're going to do this with our fingers. In just a moment, if you would rate McDonald's best hamburger on a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to hold up 10 fingers like this, all right? Everybody understand what you would do? You don't have to do it just yet. That's if you thought they was a really great, fine hamburger. Their best hamburger was really fine. I want you to hold up 10 fingers in a moment. If you think their best hamburger is pretty much a crummy hamburger, I want you to hold up a 1. Now, there is no 0 in this scale. Sometimes people want to hold up zeros, but there is no 0 in this scale. So the scale is between 1 and 10, all right? Everybody know how you're going to vote? You set down your pen, all right? So you can vote. Ready? 1, 2, 3, vote. All right, now look around the room. I see some 5s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 4s, 7s, 3s, etc. Now, would you agree with me, based on our little informal market research, that a McDonald's hamburger is no better than halfway decent? You agree with that? Now, I did have two people a few weeks ago in Missouri, when I got to this, they both raised their hands like this. 2 10s, just like this. I thought, that's kind of strange. I turned to my host and I said, what's up with that? He said, they own a McDonald's. So they have a little bit of bias in their evaluation right there. But notwithstanding their biased evaluation, I think most of us would agree that a McDonald's hamburger is no better than halfway decent. You agree with that? All right, now I'm kind of a small group leader at heart here, so help me out here. How did they do that? How did they become the #1 provider of hamburgers worldwide with hamburgers that are not any better than that? They're not any better than halfway decent. Talk to me. How did they do it? Advertising. Good. What else? All right. Consistency. A Big Mac in Texas is just as bad as a Big Mac in New Mexico, but at least I know what I'm getting, right? Children, some of you said. What else did you say? They're everywhere. In fact, Ray Kroc said one time, I'm not in the hamburger business, I'm the real estate business. The #1 owner of real estate in America is McDonald's. And you put all these things together, and I kind of eat, breathe, drink, sleep Sunday school, and everything in life in a way is kind of a picture of Sunday school to me. And this is a picture of Sunday school to me in this regard, that we take a halfway decent hamburger and we surround it with Happy Meals and French fries and consistency and clean restroom sometimes comes up, and the right location and the right land and so on, and we can become the #1 provider of hamburgers worldwide. And in a similar way, we can double a class every 2 years or less by doing these 5 things. If we have halfway decent teaching each and every week, nothing less will do. You don't got to be Chuck Swindoll. You don't got to be Zig Ziglar. You don't have to be Beth Moore to pull this thing off. But it does have to be halfway decent. Now, can I take off the gloves? Tell you something that your pastor's too sweet to tell you? Your pastor's too kind, too gentle to tell you the truth? But I'm leaving town tomorrow afternoon, and if you're not carrying around my picture in your wallet, it's okay with me. But I am going to speak the truth to you. Ready? In some cases, I'm not saying all the cases, but in a scary minority of the cases, our teaching is nowhere close to halfway decent. Have you been to Sunday school in a while? Not talking about your own fine teaching. I mean somebody else's class. Have you been? I'm telling you, there's a reason why some of these classes are not growing. I was in a class one time, the teacher was teaching from John 17, from the King James Version, where the text refers to Judas as son of perdition. The teacher looked at the text, read the text, looked at the class. Come to think of it, I was the only one there that day. And by the way, come to think of it, I was on staff and paid to be there that day. But at any rate, he read the text, Judas, son of perdition. He looked at the class and he said, now, predestination. Boy, that's a tough topic. Who really understands predestination? I'm looking at that text and I'm thinking, I don't believe that word is predestination. I believe that word is perdition. Does anybody know? Help me out here, okay? You ready? Anybody know what predestination and perdition have in common? Think, what do they have in common? P, that's right. That's all they have in common. All right, and this guy, I thought later, I thought if this guy had read one commentary, one quarterly, one teacher's book, one student book, one note from a study Bible somewhere, he probably would have worked that out. He was probably looking at that text for the very first time that morning. I had a state Sunday school guy tell me about a class he went to one time. And the teacher came in the class and he said, listen, I didn't get a chance to get to my lesson this week, so let me just pass out these quarterlies this morning. Let me ask you, if you will, would you read page 25 on that quarterly? Would you read page 26? Would you read page 27? When we get over here to page 30, we'll take prayer requests, we'll close in prayer, and we'll be done. And your pastor might be too sweet and too kind and too gentle and too gracious to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you the truth. If you can't figure out a way to teach any better than that, quit and quit tonight. We have got to have halfway decent teaching. It is a sin to take the greatest news ever to hit planet Earth and present it in such a way that people think this is not that significant, it's not that important, and it's not worth us giving our best to. We have got to have at least halfway decent. You don't have to be Chuck Swindoll to get this stuff done, but it's got to be at least halfway decent each and every week. Nothing less will do. Now, a little problem arises at this point. And by the way, we're not going to spend too much time on this. We've got a whole other talk that we do on this called Disciple-Making Teachers, but just spend a little bit of time here. And one little problem that we have is that the Bible puts it this way, that it says, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. And I believe the reason the Bible says that is because sociologists, psychologists in this day have discovered that we all have a kind of self-serving bias. That is, we all have a tendency to evaluate ourselves more highly than is really merited. For example, did you know that 90% of pastors rate themselves as above average? Now think through that for a minute, all right? 90% of them think they're above average. Are 90% of them above average? No. By definition, only 50% of them are above average. They did a survey of teenagers and asked them, do you describe yourself as being able to get along with other people better, worse, about the same as? Where would you put yourself? Guess what percentage of teenagers describe themselves as worse than average? None. Zero. Every one of them put themselves in the top half. And we all have that kind of self-serving bias, and that's why the Bible says to us, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And the surveys that have been done on the subject are really pretty startling. Bruce Wilkinson says he has surveyed people who attend Sunday school and discovered that 80% of them describe Sunday school as boring. 80%. That's kind of scary. Truthfully, I think he's a little bit negative. So I did a little survey of my own. And a couple of summers ago, several different seminars I did, I asked several different groups, how would you evaluate the teaching that you have heard? Not thinking about your own fine teaching, not thinking about the teaching of the people necessarily in your church, just think about a lifetime in churches, wherever, of attending. How would you describe those teachers? Now, the numbers varied widely. I had one person say, I have never had a teacher that dropped below the bar of halfway decent. I had another teacher that said, I've never had a teacher I thought was above the bar of halfway decent. So the numbers varied pretty widely, but the averages that came in were about a third. In the estimation of teachers, who quite honestly probably might evaluate this a little higher than the average, but in the estimation of teachers, about a third of us drop below the bar of halfway decent. That is, our teaching is so poor, it's going to be very difficult for that class to grow. So help you out with this. Let me ask you to turn to the person to your left. If there's nobody on your left, just look at somebody in the room. But I want you to picture somebody, all right? Turn to the person to the left if there is somebody on your left, all right? Don't say anything or anything. Just picture them in your mind. Now turn to the person to your right. Take a look at them. And I want you to think about this. Now think about those two people and think about this. One of them is boring. And because the Bible tells us, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, I want to kind of give you a little gift here, okay? I want to help you out with this, all right? And so this is what I want you to do. I want you, once again, to turn to the person next to you. This time you got to get a real live person. Turn to the person next to you and say these words, all right? Real loud. There's an outside chance. Say them. You just might be boring. Say it to them, all right? Help them out, help them with this self-serving bias. Now, as we've been going through this, I'm going to guess that some of you just wish we would get on to the next topic, because you're kicking back and you're saying, you know what? I don't know about these other people, but I guarantee you I am better than halfway decent. Get on to the next topic. Can I take the gloves off, friend? You worry me. The person who sits back and hears this kind of information and says, as the disciples did, is it I, Lord? I've got good news for you. I'm not too worried about you. The person who's not so sure, I'm above the bar of halfway decent, because what's going to happen is you're going to keep coming to these kind of events, and you're going to read the books, and you're going to listen to the tapes on how to be a better communicator, and you're going to watch the videos, and you're going to spend time studying, because you're going to make sure that you want to be above that bar. The person I'm worried about is the person who smugly sits back and says, get on to the next topic because I know I'm good. Quite honestly, I'm a little worried, because I'm telling you, it is true more often than we would like to admit. Someone has did a survey and discovered that if you took all of the people who sleep in church and laid them end to end, they would all be a whole lot more comfortable. So, it's kind of a common, prevalent problem, and we need to take it seriously and make sure that we are above the bar of halfway decent.